Well, we have made it to June of the off season, which has been underway for a couple of weeks now. Again, thank you all so much for making the month of May the most listened to month in the show's history. 30,000 downloads. Um, I hope to crush that number at some point, sometime this year. It may not be in the month of June since it's the off season, but you all are the best listeners on the planet. I can't thank all of you enough, to say the least. We have another action-packed show today. I'm going to get into the bottom six, starting with Brian Boyle's season review, if the Penguins should bring him back. Also get into a potential trade idea that the Penguins could make that might benefit a team that's in the Metropolitan Division as well. I don't think this has been thrown around there by too many people so far, but it's one that I came up with kind of last night when I was brainstorming a couple of things. We'll get into the numbers and stuff and why it could be good for two players who I think maybe need a change of scenery. And we'll also start looking at maybe some defensive options. If the Penguins do make a defensive trade and they bring Chris Letang back, do they sign someone because they think POJ is not ready? Who could that be? So that's all coming up right after this drop.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Oops. Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. You can also follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. I was watching the Rangers Bolts game. It's 4-2 going into the third period. Again, I said this on my Tuesday episode. That team just looks like the team of destiny right now. When they win the cup, and they very well may, I'm not going to say I told you so. They very much remind me of the 2017 Penguins. In the first period, it's 1-1 going into the second. Tampa Bay has 1.12 expected goals for. The Rangers have 0.2 expected goals for. Igor Shesterkin it just bailed them out, and now the Rangers are 4-2 because their kid line is absolutely torching Andrei Vasilevsky. It's not very rare. It's very rare, I should say, when Vasilevsky gives up 4 goals, if not 3. This was the first time he's given up more than 1, I think, since Game 6 of the first round against Toronto. He's been that good. So I'm not going to be surprised if the Rangers win the series, even though I do have the Bolts winning this in 6 games. So let's continue our player evaluations going into next season. We did most of the top 6. Let's get now to the bottom 6. And we start here with Brian Boyle, who is a pending UFA. I will say this, he definitely surprised me a lot this season. I ate a lot of crow. I gave my opinion on it. I said it was probably not going to be that good. He ended up being a pretty serviceable depth piece, even though he's a bit older in his 30s now, and he proved me and a lot of people wrong. My opinion is not fact here. I will never claim it to be fact. I try to give the best analysis that I can with just with what I watch and what I see and what the numbers tell me and what my eye test obviously tells me. So, when stuff doesn't work out for me, I shrug and move past. I'll get some hits. I'll take some L's. At the end of the day, I don't really lose sleep over it. I was actually really happy for him to prove me wrong because he really was, a great story for the Penguins this year. Comes in, scores over double-digit goals, mainly playing on the fourth line, played in 66 games for the Penguins this year. 10 of those goals were at 5v5, 19 total points, I should say, at 5v5 this year. Underlying numbers-wise, better than they were from his 2019-20 stint with the Florida Panthers. When he was on the ice, the Penguins had close to 50% of the shot attempts, so he was close to breaking even there. Actual goals for percentage, 54.7%. Expected goals, 50.7% this year. That's the highest it's been since 2017-18 when he played in nice 69 games with the New Jersey Devils. The Penguins only had 47.4% of the scoring chances at 5v5. When he was on the ice. It's still a bit step up from the previous 2 seasons when he was with Nashville and Florida. High danger chances, the Penguins had 48.6% of those. High danger goals, though really good, 62.5%. And the best thing is, he scored over double-digit goals this year, and he only shot 7.5% at 5v5. Compared to where he was last time he was in the NHL, almost 10%. Before that, 5%, 11% in 2018-19 with New Jersey. Two of those last 3 seasons, 10% or basically higher on both those times. So the fact that he did that on a pretty low shooting percentage, I thought was pretty solid. But the big question is, should the Penguins bring him back? And right now, I am kind of leaning towards no, because they have players in-house either on the team right now or down in Wilkes-Barre or out there in free agency that you can sign pretty cheaply and are better offensively, and I think can contribute more on the PK. I thought down the stretch, Boyle, he was losing his step a little bit in the playoff series against the Rangers. I just never really thought he fit against that team. Was definitely one of their worst penalty killers, and you can look up the numbers and all that. Even just eye test wise, was always a step slow when the Rangers were moving the puck in the defensive zone. The Penguins were down a man. His legs were definitely starting to show there, and going into the season, I was like, maybe if it's a 13th forward, it's okay, but if he's going to be playing a lot of games, I wasn't going to be too of a fan of it. Obviously, again, the offense was better than anyone expected, but you could definitely see him starting to, I guess, have some fatigue down the stretch and into the playoffs. That's part. He's almost 40 here, people. So. He's on the opposite side of, 35 at this point. So it wasn't too surprising that he was going to get a little bit fatigued. At the end of the day, I still don't think the Penguins should bring him back. I mean, think about, Radim Zohorna, he has a one-way contract with the team next year. They're really going to want to see what do they have in this player, right? That's going to be fairly interesting. Drew O'Connor, he's going to be ready to come up. I already talked about Valtteri Pustin when I talked about some of the kids in Wilkes-Barre a couple of episodes ago. There's going to be plenty of, depth forwards in free agency that are going to be there for the taking. Maybe you don't have to pay, $2.75 million for a Brock McGinn for 4 years, but, you can maybe pay for a couple of years for a depth player that makes 1.5 to $2 million that can do what he does, but a lot better. And I do think that's what the Penguins need to do here. During the offseason. Obviously, I thank Boyle for everything he did this season. And, I was glad he was even able to come back and play hockey after everything he's been through. But I still think right now his services are best used on another team. Again, I'll say it for the third or fourth time, really enjoyed him this season. He was obviously well-liked in the locker room. I think everyone on the team had the utmost respect for him, and, rightfully so. He came in on a professional tryout. Remember, he had to make the team out of camp and in the preseason just to get a contract, and played well enough, did good in the regular season, struggled in the playoffs, didn't make that much money, so I'm not really too upset about that. And he's maybe hopefully going to be able to go out and maybe make a little more money and hopefully get a guaranteed contract from a different team in 2022, 2023. So right now, I don't think it would be in the Penguins' best interest to sign him just because, the salary cap is obviously very real with this team. They have other bigger priorities than him right now. And when that time comes to potentially find a replacement, you're really not going to have to look too far. This is going to sound a little mean, but I don't think it's too bad. He's the kind of player that's very easy to replace, whether you're looking down in Wilkes-Barre or whether you're looking via free agency, or, if you need to make a trade for a depth forward, you can do that just fine too. So at the end of the day, I'm not really sweating it. I thank him for everything he's done for the team, but, in my opinion, and yes, I stress this is my opinion, I don't think he should be on the team next year with how he played in the playoffs and just a little bit down the stretch too. So that wraps up this first segment of the episode today. Coming up in the second segment, we're going to get to that potential trade idea / proposal that I came up with in my head, and why I think it makes sense for both teams. But before I get to that, you can save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why should you choose to spend 30%, 50%, or even 100% more from the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? Rock Auto is a family business and do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. The prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you can need, from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. You can go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car, truck, and you can write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. That is rockauto.com. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. And I'm just loading up the stuff I need right here on Natural Stat Tricks. So this is what I am potentially thinking. And it would, I think, make sense for both teams, though. Would these teams trade with each other? I'm not sure. What would you all think? And yes, this might be silly season here. What would you all think of potentially dealing Kasperi Kapanen for Martin Necas of the Carolina Hurricanes? Both are basically RFAs. Obviously I know Kapanen is, and I know Necas is too, and he really struggled this season. He was not himself, which was really weird. And yes, I did have to. I just wanted to double check. He was an RFA. This year, 10 goals, 32 5v5 points. But he wasn't that same player that we saw last year with the Hurricanes, where he was just everywhere on the ice. And the same goes for Kasperi Kapanen. He basically lost all of his confidence this year. For the Penguins, would always just come into the offensive zone, curl back, and just pass it off, and he's not able to shoot it. Defensively, he made strides, but whether it was his release, his playmaking ability, just his lack of forechecking, it wasn't there, and I don't think he should be back next year, even though he'll probably get a qualifying offer. I still would not sign him to a contract unless it's probably like, $1 million or something like that. But overall, this season for Necas, 40 points in 78 games. Last year, 41 points in 53 games, which is obviously a lot better production-wise. He was probably on pace to have 55 to 60 points last year. This year, he gets 40 points in an 82-game season, so it was a little bit of a step back. You go in his underlying numbers, 55% of the shot attempts this year for the Hurricanes when he was on the ice, 53% of the actual goals for, expected goals right around 50% of the scoring chances. Did not break even in high danger, 48.1%. High danger goals, though, 51.1% for the Hurricanes when he was on the ice. I would be in favor for the Penguins to make this trade. And same for Carolina, because I would love for Kapanen to get his confidence back on a team such as the Hurricanes. They'll ask him to shoot the puck a lot. I think Rod Brindamore will, go to bat for him. He always goes to bat for his players. He is the textbook players coach, as some like to call him. And I think it's definitely like a move that Carolina would maybe make, just because, they kind of go bargain hunting for their moves. They don't really like to pay a lot of their players, to say the least. Their biggest contracts right now, Svechnikov, Aho, and Teravainen. I think Aho and Svechnikov make over 8. Teravainen makes, I can just double check that here real quick. I just had that actually on my Cap Friendly. Well, I'll take a look at it here real quick when I get a chance. But they balked at offering Dougie Hamilton a long-term contract. They took a flyer on Tony DeAngelo. That worked out really well. They uplifted their goaltending. They brought in 2 players who, and Antti Raanta and Barry Anderson for a bit cheap, to say the least. They didn't really want to pay Nedeljkovic even $4 million. So, this is a team, they don't often spend to the cap. And Kapanen, he's not really going to get a lot on his next contract. I could definitely see the Hurricanes, for an analytically inclined team as they are, saying, hey, you know what? Maybe this was a really off year for him. He's had a couple of really good years in the NHL. Let's see what he can do. Obviously on an offense base for his team, you can put him with maybe Svechnikov and Aho. You can put him with Teravainen or something like that. He was good defensively this year. And then for Necas, he had a little bit of an off year too. And, maybe a change of scenery is what he needs. The Penguins, I don't really think he's going to be getting a lot on his contract either. I think they'll be able to afford him, and he should be good to give them, 15, maybe upwards of 20 goals next year. You can play him on the third line with Jeff Carter, something like that. Heck, you maybe play him on Evgeny Malkin's line, potentially too, if Danton Heinen comes back and if Chino comes back. It's an idea that I do think makes sense. Though, would Ron Hextall do it? I'm not sure. Would Don Waddell do it? No, I'm also not sure. This is silly season for a reason. But in terms of two players that struggled this year that could use a change, this is as good as you're going to get, to be honest. And yes, there's the factor of, they're two teams in the same division, though they're not really division rivals, to say the least. I mean, I don't think these two teams have made a trade. Obviously, I know they made the Jordan Staal trade, but I actually can't even remember the last time the Penguins and the Hurricanes made a trade. I actually am going to double check that here real quick just to see when he did make a trade. When everything that pulls up on Google, I might think that is the last time they made a trade. I legitimately cannot remember the last time those two teams made a deal. So is it unlikely? Sure. But would it be a good trade, especially for the Penguins? Yes. And again, I do think it makes sense for the Hurricanes because, it would be so Penguins for Kapanen to actually turn it around in Carolina and play like he did that last year in Toronto. And, especially during that 2020-21 season for the Penguins, where he had 10 goals and 30 points in 40 games. His underlying numbers this year, they weren't bad defensively. He made a lot of strides. It was just his play in the offensive zone with the puck. His shot was not there. Forechecking, he really lacked in that regard. And, I just think Mike Sullivan ran out of ideas with him this season. I'm going to get to his season review a little bit later on during the offseason, probably in the next couple of days to a week. But, in terms of a trade, that could maybe surprise some fans. It wouldn't surprise me. I think this would make a lot of sense for the Penguins. So, tell me what you all think. Would you all do this trade? Would you like Martin Nichas with the Penguins? Did you like my explanation for why it could make sense from both teams' perspective? Let me know in the YouTube comments. You can DM me on Twitter. You can find me on any of my social media. I've had people, find my Instagram and stuff like that. And honestly, I don't really, care if people follow me on Instagram, to be honest. I don't really post anything on there anyway. But that wraps up the second segment of the show. Coming up with the final segment, we'll get to some defensive free agents that could make sense if the Penguins do make a trade along their left-handed, among one of their left-handed defensemen, and if they decide that POJ is not ready to come up yet. But before I get to that, our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. You can head to the website today or use your phone to learn more about the trends in action. That is BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. If you want to follow me on Twitter, Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter, LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen of the day. So, doing a little bit of research on Cap Friendly here. And, some of the best left-handed D out there. I saw Nick Leddy, and, I don't make a lot of plus minus. That's one of the last stats I use. But it does jump out at me that he was a minus 30 this year. That is very bad. That's not a number you want to be at. He's also just too old, I think, at this point. And, he's 31, but he plays like he's kind of 35 or 36. He's washed at this point. I don't think he makes too much sense. Danny DeKeyser is a UFA. I'll pass. He had 11 points in 59 games. Calvin Dahan at 31. He was a player that I used to really like. But, he's really fallen off as of late. Nikita Zadorov, I think I touched on him about a couple of weeks ago. I would love if the Penguins brought him in. I don't think I touched on his underlying numbers too much on this podcast. I can right here if you all just let me here, if I can just do this. Look at these numbers from the regular season and the playoffs. So, career high stuff. 74 games, 59% of the shot attempts for the Flames when he was on the ice, 54% of the actual goals for them when he was on the ice, 55% of the expected goals for the Flames, 57% of the scoring chances for them when he was on the ice, 54% of the high danger chances for the actual high danger goals for 57.8%. He's been above 50% once in high danger. He's been above 50% once in scoring chances, once in expected goals, and once for shot attempts. This was a breakout year for this player. He's only 27 years old, had 22 points. If I look up how much money he made here, just to see how much of a raise he could potentially be getting, let me check. So, account friendly is just being like ridiculous here. Let me just make sure. So he was making, okay, his AAV was 3.75 this year. It was a 1-year deal when he signed it back in August. He might ask for a raise. His counting stats weren't that good, but if teams really do look at those underlying numbers, he's going to be getting a decent raise. I would not be surprised if someone throws 4.5 to 4.6 million at him. I mean, if I were the Penguins and I had the cap space, he would be someone I would target right away. I mean, I'm just kind of imagining him on this team and not Brian Dumoulin for next year, who was way worse than Zadorov. I mean, Zadorov brought a lot of offense to the Flames, was solid defensively, has a nice first pass, his own entries, his own exits. His numbers there were also really good. I would move heaven and hell for the Penguins to go after him if they need a defensive replacement for one of the three left-handed guys. If they feel like POJ is not ready, he makes a lot of sense in that regard. Will Butcher in Buffalo, he's only 27, still young enough where I think he could maybe use a little bit of a turnaround. I mean, remember, Mike Matheson was kind of in the gutter when he was in Florida, comes here, plays the best hockey of his life with Tar Reardon coaching him. I think Will Butcher on a cheap deal, that would make sense. Don't sue me. I think his numbers are fine for maybe a bottom pairing guy. Again, that's if they don't think POJ is ready. I do think he would make sense as well. Alex Edler, I will pass. Ben Sherratt, no thanks. Ian Cole is an interesting case, but the only reason I would say no to that is because him and Mike Sullivan, I don't think really saw eye to eye when he was there. I mean, remember, I think it was a healthy scratch at times during his last season when he was there. He ended up being traded. He ended up being in the big trade package when they got Derek Brassard. And, again, I would love to make that trade again. No one saw him stinking that bad. I remember people saying that trade would come back and haunt the Penguins. And, I liked Ian Cole at the time. I think he was a very defensively responsible player. I still think he is that. But, he is a little bit older right now. Are you all comfortable signing him to be, play on the left side again? Because right now, I think that all three of their left-handed D are better than Cole. But if one does go, is he the worst option to bring in? No. Is he the best option? Probably not either. He would make sense, but I still think you can probably go for someone a bit younger and someone a bit cheaper too. And again, obviously, the coaching aspect with Mike Sullivan, him and them two never saw eye to eye. A couple others here. Thomas Hickey played 2 games this year. No. Michael Kempney. No. Mark Stahl's really bad now. Ethan Bear would be really intriguing, but he is an RFA though. Do the Hurricanes trade his rights to another team? That's another trade that the Penguins, they could be, interested in that player, especially if Chris Letang walks in. And I'm not saying Ethan Bear is going to be the next Chris Letang. He's not, to say the least. But I could see them being interested in him, to bring him in and hopefully, I guess, help out the right-handed, just help out the right side a little bit if, God forbid, Letang is not here next year. Bear was a healthy scratch all playoff long for the Hurricanes. I don't think that's going to sit well with him, and he could potentially ask out. I think he deserved to play in the playoffs for the Hurricanes. He had a good regular season for them. I think it was almost 20 points this season. Underlying numbers have always been strong. He is another player I would look at for at least for the right side if Chris Letang does not come back. Otherwise, the market here, kind of a little barren. I mean, Ilya Lyubushkin, he's a UFA. That wouldn't be, I don't think, the worst idea. Andrei Sekharov with the Dallas Stars, he's a bit too old. Robert Hagg, no thank you. Troy Stetcher with the Kings is a UFA. Probably not. Justin Braun, we all see him get absolutely walked by the Crosby line in that series. Brett Kulak, he's a UFA as a left-handed option. He's done really well with the Edmonton Oilers right now. I think he would make a lot of sense to bring in. He went for very cheap at the trade deadline, to say the least, when he was traded from Montreal to Edmonton. I think he could come in on a pretty cheap contract for the Penguins. So those are most of the targets that I am looking at. I'm probably going to do a big deep breakdown of some of these players as free agency gets to, but that's just a little tease of who I think the Penguins could go after if they want to make some changes on the back end at both the left side if their trade is made and potentially the right side if Chris Letang does not come back. But that'll do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. Of course, I understand the team's not making a lot of moves right now. It's very, very quiet. But at the end of the day, there's still always things to talk about with this team, and I appreciate every single one of you listening to the show and listening to give my analysis, my opinions on what the team should do with some moves this offseason and just what I thought of some players from this past season and what they should do with them moving forward. So have another episode coming for you all on Thursday. You can check that out. Hopefully, I'm hoping for that in the afternoon. I think, and then Friday, I'm going to hope for morning to afternoon for that one. So again, thank you all so much for listening. Hope you all have a great rest of your night. And I'll talk to you all on Thursday.